Whenever the abortion debate comes up, it's always framed as this huge moral battle, right? It's all about rights and freedom and when life begins. And honestly, it feels like two sides screaming at each other from across a canyon.
But what if I told you all that moral language is just the tip of the iceberg? What if, deep down, this isn't about morality at all? What if it's actually a society negotiating its own survival? We're going to break down a really powerful new way of looking at this, a framework that doesn't just explain the conflict, but can actually help predict the rise and fall of entire nations. Hey, if that idea just grabbed you and you want more deep dives that totally reframe how you see the world, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to Project Human. It makes a huge difference. Okay, let's get right into it. The whole thing is built on something called the adaptive levers framework. Now, I want you to think of this like a survival toolkit for an entire society. When a society needs to manage its population to make sure it sticks around, it has four basic tools or levers it can pull. And what's so cool about this is how these four levers cover pretty much everything. First up, you've got sexual regulation. This is the most direct one, stuff like abortion laws or rules about marriage. Then there's lever number 2, economic incentives. Things like childcare subsidies that make having kids easier. Lever 3 is all about culture and religion. These are the big, powerful stories we tell ourselves, like family is sacred. And finally, you have lever 4, technology, using things like AI and automation so you don't actually need a massive population to keep things running. Now, societies don't just pull these levers randomly. They actually tend to move through 3 distinct stages. Stage 1 is what we'll call survival mode. Think of a tiny, fragile tribe where literally every single birth is critical. Stage 3 is the opposite end, prosperity mode. This is a wealthy, stable, high-tech society where having a family is more of a personal choice. And stage 2? That's the messy one. That's the transitional phase, and that's where the fireworks really happen. So the big question is, what pushes a society from one stage to the next? I mean, for this framework to be useful, there has to be some kind of measurable trigger, right? Something that we can actually see and track. And there is. It's called resource surplus per capita. It sounds a little academic, but all it really means is the point where a society goes from just barely scraping by, just enough food and shelter, to having enough extra resources to invest in big things like universal healthcare or public education. That surplus is the game changer. And this right here shows you the core dynamic. When that surplus goes up, a society starts to move away from level 1, those strict sexual rules, and leans more on level 2, economic support. Think about Scandinavia. They built a huge surplus and then poured it into things like universal childcare. But if that surplus disappears, like it did in some post-Soviet countries, the whole thing goes into reverse. The safety nets vanish, and the society flips back to stricter, more direct control over reproduction because, well, it has to. So let's zoom in on stage 2, because this isn't just a transition, it's an absolute battleground. And the reason it gets so explosive is that you have 2 totally different survival strategies fighting for control at the exact same time. This quote from the source material just nails it. You've got one part of society still thinking with that stage 1 brain, saying, we need more people, we need more control to survive. And you have another part pushing for a stage 3 vision, saying, no, survival comes from state support, technology, and individual freedom. Abortion is the flashpoint. It's where those 2 worldviews collide head-on.
The United States is a perfect, almost textbook example of a stage 2 country. You literally have some states pushing for strict abortion bans. That's pure stage 1 logic. They're trying to boost the population through direct control. At the exact same time, you have other states expanding welfare and reproductive health care, which is classic stage 3 strategy. It's not just a disagreement, it's 2 completely different survival systems clashing inside one nation.
Now, it is so tempting to look at all this and just dismiss the moral arguments as, a distraction. But they're not. They're actually essential. Moral language is the software that a society uses to justify pulling one of these hard structural levers. A government won't just say, hey, we need more people to run the factories. No, it'll say life is sacred. That moral code is what gives them the permission to make these huge choices. All right, so the theory sounds pretty solid, but does it actually hold up in the real world? Let's put it to the test and look at a few different kinds of countries. Let's start with the really clear-cut examples. You take a poor, fragile nation like Afghanistan. That's classic stage 1. Survival is everything, so you see strict abortion bans to maximize the population. Then you look at a wealthy, stable stage 3 nation like Sweden. Their abortion is seen as a personal choice because the state has this massive safety net and a high-tech economy. They don't need to control reproduction to survive.
Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. But what about the curveballs? What about those places that are incredibly rich but still have really strict reproductive rules? These are what we call the hybrid states, and they show just how complex this survival game can really get.
Check out countries like the UAE or Saudi Arabia. On the surface, they look totally stage 3, unbelievable wealth, futuristic cities, all the tech. But if you look under the hood, their actual citizen population is pretty small and fragile, which is a stage 1 problem. So what's their solution? They pull two levers at once. They use strict reproductive rules on their own citizens to keep the population growing and cohesive, while they import millions of foreign workers to actually run the economy. It's a wild hybrid survival strategy.
So here's the big takeaway. While all these debates around abortion are always going to feel intensely personal and moral, they're also a window into a much, much bigger story. They're showing us in real time how a society is trying to solve the fundamental problem of its own survival.
By seeing which levers a country is pulling, and maybe more importantly, which levers it's fighting over, we can understand not just where it is right now, but where it's probably going. So now that you have this framework, I want you to look around. What levers do you see your own society pulling? The answer might tell you a whole lot more than you think.